My sister gave me a DNA test on my birthday and said, "Nobody's son," laughing at me in front of 40 family members and friends at the restaurant she'd insisted on booking for my 28th birthday celebration. Then I opened the envelope she thrust into my hands, and my world shattered into 1,000 pieces as everyone watched, their phones already recording my humiliation. The upscale Italian restaurant fell silent except for Joanna's cruel laughter, echoing off the exposed brick walls. She stood there in her designer dress, one hand on her pregnant belly, the other holding her champagne glass, sparkling cider. She'd corrected everyone earlier with her practiced, modest smile. Her husband, Domingos, sat beside her, smirking into his wine like this was the entertainment portion of the evening. My mother, Isabel, sat frozen at the head of the table. Her face drained of color, but she said nothing. She didn't defend me. She didn't even look at me. I pulled the paper from the envelope with hands that had started to shake, despite my determination to stay calm. The DNA test results showed in clear, clinical language what Joanna had just announced. Probability of paternity between me and Francisco Juan Carmo, my father who died 5 years ago, was 0%. Not his biological son, the man who'd taught me to ride a bike, who'd attended every science fair, who'd told me on his deathbed that he was proud of the man I'd become, hadn't actually been my father at all. "I knew something was off about you," Joanna continued, her voice carrying to every corner of the restaurant that had gone tomb quiet. "You never looked like Dad. Always wondered why Mom treated you so differently, so carefully. Now we know why, don't we, Mom?" Our mother, I still thought of her that way though, now even that felt uncertain, remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. Tears streamed down her face, but she offered no explanation, no denial, nothing. The silence was somehow worse than any words could have been. "Found Dad's private papers when we were cleaning out the storage unit last month," Joanna said, walking around the table toward me with deliberate steps, her heels clicking on the hardwood floor. "Letters. Old letters between Mom and someone else. Someone whose name might sound very familiar to you, little brother. Or should I say, half-brother?" She emphasized the word with vicious satisfaction. "Carlos Henrique Brandaño. Ring any bells?" Carlos Brandaño, my mother's former colleague from the high school where she'd taught, the man who'd moved away when I was a baby, the one whose name I'd heard mentioned occasionally with unusual tension in my mother's voice. The man whose old photographs I'd seen once in a box my mother had hurriedly closed when I'd stumbled upon them as a child. "The DNA test was easy to arrange," Joanna continued, clearly enjoying her moment of power. "Took one of Dad's old razors from the house, one of your toothbrushes from that weekend you stayed over last month. The lab doesn't care about consent for informational purposes. And isn't the information just fascinating?" I looked around the table at faces I'd known my entire life. My Aunt Graça looked away. My cousin Joaquim stared at his plate. My best friend from college, Manuel, looked horrified but didn't move to comfort me. They were all watching me break down, and several were indeed recording on their phones, probably already uploading to social media. This public destruction was precisely what Joanna had orchestrated. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why like this? Why now?" "Because you don't deserve what you've been stealing from our family," Joanna said, her voice turning cold and sharp as broken glass. "Dad's inheritance was split 50-50 between us. That's $400 that should have gone entirely to me, his actual biological child. You're not entitled to a single cent of Carmo money. You're not a Carmo at all." There it was, the real reason. The money. My father, Francisco, had left his estate divided equally between Joanna and me when he'd died. She'd seemed fine with it at the time, or at least she'd hidden her resentment well, but apparently, for 3 years, this had been eating at her. And now, pregnant with her first child and having bought a house in Oakland that was stretching even her tech salary, she'd decided it was time to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers alone. "That money is already spent," I said quietly, though my mind was racing, cataloging every detail of this moment, every witness, every word. "I put it toward my graduate research, my apartment down payment, We'll see what a lawyer says about that," Domingos interrupted, speaking for the first time. "Fraud is fraud. You accepted money under false pretenses. You'll be paying it back with interest." He pulled out his phone and made a show of texting someone. "I'm messaging our attorney right now." This is the kind of case he loves. Clear-cut inheritance fraud. I stood slowly, carefully folding the DNA test results and placing them back in the envelope. My hands had stopped shaking. Something cold and clear had settled over me, pushing back the initial shock and humiliation. I looked at my sister, really looked at her, and saw something I'd been blind to for years. She'd always resented me. Every achievement I'd earned, every bit of pride my father had shown in me, had been a wound to her ego. She was older. She was the biological child, and yet our father had loved us equally. She'd never forgiven him for that, and now she'd never forgive me for existing. I need to leave, I said calmly, too calmly perhaps, because Joanna's triumphant smile faltered slightly. But before I go, I want everyone here to remember this moment exactly as it happened. Who said what? Who did what? Because I have a feeling we'll all be remembering this night for a very long time. I turned to my mother, who finally met my eyes. In her face, I saw guilt and fear and something else I couldn't quite name. Is it true? I asked her simply. She nodded once, a tiny movement, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. I'm so sorry, Afonso. I never meant for you to find out like this. I wanted to tell you so many times, but your father, Francisco, he loved you so much. He said it didn't matter, that you were his son in every way that counted. I thought we could just let it stay buried. Well, it's not buried anymore, Joanna said with satisfaction. It's right here in the open, where everyone can see exactly what you are. A mistake. A lie. I picked up my jacket from the back of my chair and walked toward the exit, past all those staring faces, those recording phones, that collective judgment. But as I reached the door, I turned back one more time. Joanna, I want you to think very carefully about something. Dad kept a safe deposit box at Bay Federal Credit Union. Did you find the key when you went through his storage unit? Her face flickered with uncertainty. What does that have to do with anything? Everything, I said simply. Absolutely everything. Then I walked out into the San Francisco night, leaving behind the wreckage of my birthday celebration and the family I thought I'd known. But I wasn't destroyed. Not anymore. Because my father had taught me something important in those last months before he died, something Joanna had never bothered to learn. In biochemistry, as in life, you never reveal your full results until you've checked them 3 times. And I had a lot of checking to do. The Uber driver didn't ask why I was leaving a birthday party early, which I appreciated. I sat in the back seat watching San Francisco blur past the window, my mind already 3 steps ahead of the rage and humiliation still pulsing through my veins. The safe deposit box. I'd mentioned it deliberately, a calculated move to plant uncertainty in Joanna's mind. The truth was more complicated than she knew, and that complication was about to become her nightmare. 6 months before my father died, he'd asked me to meet him at his office at the pharmaceutical consulting firm where he'd worked for 30 years. I'd just graduated from UC Berkeley with my biochemistry degree and was deciding between job offers. He'd seemed unusually serious that day, almost anxious. There are things I need to tell you, he'd said, pulling out a small key from his desk drawer. Things about your mother and me, about our family. But I need you to promise me something first. Wait until after I'm gone to look into any of it. Can you do that for me? I'd promised, confused but trusting. He'd handed me the key to his safe deposit box at Bay Federal Credit Union, along with a sealed envelope. When I die, you open this. Not before. And Afonso, your sister doesn't know about this box. Keep it that way. For 5 years, I'd honored that promise. The envelope sat in my own safe deposit box, unopened. I'd almost forgotten about it in the daily routine of building my career, establishing my life. But now, sitting in that Uber with Joanna's cruelty still echoing in my ears, I knew it was time. My phone buzzed constantly with texts and calls. I ignored them all until I saw one from Manuel, my college roommate who'd been at the dinner. Man, I'm so sorry, that was brutal. Your sister is insane. Half the restaurant recorded it. It's already on Instagram. Call me when you're ready. I opened Instagram with a sense of grim inevitability. There it was, multiple videos from different angles, all showing the moment Joanna had announced my illegitimacy, my mother's tears, my stunned face. The hashtags were already forming. Dr. Family Drama, your DNA reveals, birthday shock. Comments poured in, most expressing sympathy for me, but plenty reveling in the spectacle. Joanna had even posted her own version with the caption, "Sometimes the truth hurts, but family deserves honesty." Real talk, Chachuri, DNA don't lie. The spite was breathtaking. She'd planned this public execution down to the social media rollout. I called Manuel as the Uber pulled up to my apartment building in the Mission District. I need your help, I said without preamble. Tomorrow morning, can you meet me at Bay Federal Credit Union at 9? Of course, he said immediately. Whatever you need. Are you okay? I will be, I said, and meant it. I will be. Inside my apartment, I poured myself a whiskey I didn't drink and sat at my desk opening my laptop. As a biochemist working for a biotech firm, I had access to various databases and research tools. But what I needed now wasn't scientific. It was legal and financial. I started with the inheritance paperwork from my father's estate. Attorney Clara Moniz had handled the probate. I pulled up the documents I'd saved digitally, reading through them with new eyes. The will was straightforward. Everything split 50-50 between Joanna Beatriz Carmo and Afonso Miguel Carmo, my beloved children. But there was a clause I'd glossed over before. Should any heir contest the validity of another heir's inheritance on grounds of parentage, all assets of the contesting party shall be redistributed according to secondary provisions detailed in sealed documents held by Bay Federal Credit Union, Box 247. My father had anticipated this. He'd known. I searched through my email archives for correspondence with Clara Moniz. Found what I needed, her direct number. It was 10 p.m., but this couldn't wait. Miss Moniz, this is Afonso Carmo. I apologize for the late call, but there's been a development regarding my father's estate. The attorney listened as I explained the evening's events, her occasional sharp intake of breath the only indication of her reaction. Mr. Carmo, I need to be very clear with you. Your father left specific instructions about this exact scenario. He came to me 18 months before he died and updated his will with those contingency clauses. He was very explicit that if your sister ever challenged your inheritance based on DNA, certain documents were to be unsealed. What documents? I can't tell you over the phone, but I can meet you at the bank tomorrow morning. I have co-access to that safe deposit box. Your father made sure of it. After we hung up, I finally opened the text from my mother. 12 messages, increasingly desperate. Please call me. I need to explain. It's not what you think. Your father knew. He always knew. Joanna is making a terrible mistake. There are things she doesn't know. Please, Afonso, come to the house. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted a careful email to my own attorney, Paulo Reis, whom I'd used for my apartment purchase. I explained the situation clinically, attached screenshots of the social media posts, and requested an urgent meeting. Then I did something that would have seemed petty if it weren't so strategically necessary. I downloaded every video of my public humiliation, every comment, every share. I documented Joanna's Instagram post with its mocking hashtags, Domingos' threat about their attorney, every witness who'd recorded my degradation. In any legal battle, evidence was everything. My phone rang. Joanna. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Afonso, I know you're upset, but you need to understand my position. I'm about to have a baby. Domingos and I have a mortgage. That money matters. And honestly, it was never really yours to begin with. Dad was too soft-hearted to face the truth. But I'm not. Our lawyer will be contacting you about repayment terms. If you cooperate, we can keep this relatively simple. If you fight it, well, you saw how easily the truth comes out. There's more where that came from. The threat was clear. She had more ammunition, more ways to hurt me, but so did I. She just didn't know it yet. I spent the rest of the night reading through old family photos on my computer, looking at them with new understanding. There, a picture from when I was 6 months old. My father holding me with such obvious love. Another from my first day of kindergarten, my 10th birthday, my high school graduation. In every single image, Francisco Juan Carmo looked at me like I was the sun itself. Whatever DNA said, whatever biological truth had been revealed tonight, that love had been real. But Joanna had made a choice. She'd chosen cruelty, public humiliation, and greed. She'd weaponized a painful family secret for money and spite, and in doing so, she'd started a war she couldn't possibly understand. Because my father had taught me one other critical lesson during my biochemistry training: Always read the full protocol before beginning an experiment. Assumptions kill research projects. Incomplete information destroys conclusions. Joanna had made a massive assumption that she knew the full story, that the DNA test was the end of the investigation, not the beginning. Tomorrow morning at Bay Federal Credit Union, we'd find out just how wrong she was. Manuel met me outside Bay Federal Credit Union at 8:50 the next morning, holding 2 large coffees. His face was drawn with concern, but he didn't ask unnecessary questions. That was why we'd been friends for a decade. "Whatever's in that box," he said, handing me the coffee. "I hope it's good." "So do I admitted. "Because if it's not, I just lost a family for nothing." Clara Moniz arrived precisely at 9, a slim woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and the sharp eyes of someone who'd spent 40 years reading people as carefully as contracts. She shook my hand firmly. "Mr. Carmo, I'm sorry we're meeting again under these circumstances. Your father was a good man. He tried very hard to prevent this exact situation." "But he knew it might happen," I said. "He knew your sister," she replied simply. "He loved her, but he wasn't blind to her nature. Shall we?" Inside the bank's vault room, the safe deposit box was larger than I'd expected. Clara used her key first, then I used mine. The metal drawer slid open to reveal several manila envelopes, each labeled in my father's precise handwriting. "For Afonso, read first. Medical records, Isabel Carmo, 1996. Financial documents, complete estate. Correspondence, Carlos Brando, 1996, 1997. DNA documentation, all parties. Video testimony, Francisco Carmo, play last." My hands trembled as I reached for the first envelope. Clara placed a gentle hand on my arm. "Before you open anything, you should know that your father sat in this very room 5 years ago and recorded that video testimony. He was already sick. He knew he was dying, and he wanted you to understand everything before you had to face what he knew was coming." I opened the envelope marked, "Read first." Inside was a letter in my father's handwriting, dated 3 months before his death. "My dearest Afonso, if you're reading this, then Joanna has done what I feared she might. She's told you about your biological parentage, probably in the cruelest way possible, and probably for the worst reasons, money and spite. I need you to understand several things, and I need you to understand them in order, which is why I've labeled these envelopes. First, I have always been your father. From the moment your mother told me she was pregnant, from the instant I held you in the delivery room, you have been my son. Nothing, no DNA test, no biological truth, changes that fact. I chose you. Every single day for 28 years, I chose you. Second, your mother and I had been separated when she became pregnant with you. Not divorced, separated. I'd moved out after a particularly bad fight about whether to have a second child. Joanna was 7, and Isabel wanted another baby. I didn't. I was wrong, by the way. I was wrong about many things. Third, Isabel and Carlos had a brief relationship during our separation. When she discovered she was pregnant, she came to me immediately. She was honest about everything. She gave me a choice. I could walk away, or I could come home and raise you as my son. The choice was the easiest I've ever made. Fourth, Carlos Brandão never knew. He moved to Portugal for a teaching position before Isabel realized she was pregnant. She never told him. He has no idea you exist. Fifth, this is crucial, Afonso. When Joanna was born, Isabel and I had fertility struggles leading to her conception. We eventually used IVF. What I never told anyone, not even Isabel, was that the doctors discovered I had a genetic condition that meant Joanna could potentially have serious health issues. Huntington's disease runs in the Carmo family. My father died of it. I'm a carrier. Before you were born, I had myself tested thoroughly. I had Joanna tested too, though Isabel never knew. Joanna is positive for the Huntington's gene. She will develop the disease probably in her 40s. You don't have it. You can't have it, because you're not my biological son. When I held you as a baby, my first feeling after overwhelming love was overwhelming relief. I had a son who would never suffer the disease that killed my father, that's slowly killing me now. A son who could live a full, healthy life. Joanna doesn't know about her condition. I couldn't tell her. How do you tell your child she's inherited a degenerative disease that will rob her of everything? I've been a coward about it. But now you need to know, because if she's coming after you about the inheritance, it's probably because her medical expenses are about to become catastrophic. The symptoms likely started. She probably doesn't understand what's happening to her yet, but she will. The inheritance money, I split it evenly not despite your parentage, but because of it. Joanna will need extensive medical care. You won't. But I couldn't explain that without explaining everything else. I left additional funds in a medical trust specifically for her treatment, which will activate when she's diagnosed. Her treatment will be covered completely. She'll never need your portion of the inheritance. She doesn't know this. She thinks she needs that money because she doesn't know about the medical trust. In the other envelopes, you'll find proof of everything. Medical records, the IVF documentation showing the genetic counseling, financial documents showing the full extent of the estate, including the medical trust. Letters between your mother and me discussing our decision about you. Everything you need to understand the full truth. And in one envelope, there's information about Carlos Brandano, your biological father. If you want to find him, you can. That's your choice. I've always wanted you to have that choice. Watch the video last. I need you to understand everything before you see my face as I explain it. I'm sorry you had to learn about this in pain. I tried to prevent it, but Joanna has always been like me, stubborn, proud, and sometimes cruel when hurt. She's like me in the worst ways. You're like me in the best ways, despite our lack of shared DNA. That always made me smile. Whatever you decide to do with this information, know that I love you. I have always loved you. I chose you, Afonso. Every single day, I chose you. Your father, Francisco João Carmo. I couldn't see the end of the letter through my tears. Manuel was crying too, though he'd only read over my shoulder. Clara Moniz handed us both tissues with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen this scene before. There's more, she said gently. Your father's estate was actually worth significantly more than the $800 split between you and your sister. The full amount was $2, $1 million. The additional $1, $3 million is in an irrevocable medical trust specifically for Joanna's treatment once she's diagnosed with Huntington's disease. It will cover everything: medications, care facilities, experimental treatments. She'll never have to worry about medical bankruptcy. Does she know? I asked through my tears. No. Your father's instructions were clear. She wasn't to be told about the trust until after diagnosis. He hoped she might never need to know at all, that maybe she'd be asymptomatic. But if she's showing the aggression, poor judgment, and impulsivity you described last night, those can be early Huntington's symptoms. I opened the medical records envelope with shaking hands. There it was. Genetic testing for Joanna Beatriz Carmo, dated 2 months after her birth. Positive for Huntington's disease gene mutation. Projected symptom onset, mid-30s to early 40s. Expected symptoms: personality changes, impulsivity, aggression, cognitive decline, motor difficulties. She was 32. The same age symptoms often began. She's sick, I whispered. She's sick, and she doesn't even know it. The cruelty at your birthday party, Clara said quietly. The impulsive decision to humiliate you publicly, the financial paranoia, the aggressive behavior, those could all be early symptoms. Or she could just be acting like herself under stress. But either way, your father made sure she'd be taken care of. I spent the next 2 hours in that vault room, reading through everything my father had left me. The correspondence between my parents showed a couple struggling to make a difficult decision with love and integrity. The financial documents revealed my father's meticulous planning to protect both his children, the biological daughter who'd inherit his disease, and the chosen son who wouldn't. The envelope about Carlos Brandano contained an address in Lisbon, Portugal, and copies of academic papers he'd published. A philosophy professor, specializing in ethics. My biological father was an ethics professor. The irony wasn't lost on me. Finally, I opened the video file on Clara's laptop. My father's face appeared, gaunt from the cancer but still sharp-eyed, still present. Afonso, if you're watching this, you now know everything. I've left you with an impossible choice, and I'm sorry for that. Your sister has hurt you badly. I know she has. That's why you're here. But she's also sick, or will be soon, even if she doesn't know it yet. You have every right to expose her cruelty. You have every legal right to defend yourself. You have the evidence to destroy her reputation and her claim to your inheritance. Everything in this box proves your right to that money and her lack of claim to it. But I'm asking you, not as your father, but as someone who loved you both, to think carefully about what you do next. Think about the person you want to be. Think about whether revenge will actually make you feel better, or whether it will just make you more like her. I can't tell you what to do. You're a man now. You make your own choices. But whatever you choose, make it deliberately. Make it as yourself, not as a reaction to her. I love you, son. I'm proud of you. And I trust you to do the right thing, whatever that means to you. Take care of your mother. She's made mistakes, but she's loved you fiercely. And if Joanna gets sick, really sick, remember that the disease will take her from herself. The sister who hurt you and the sister who loved you once were both real. Try to remember the good one when the bad one is all you can see. Goodbye, Afonso. Thank you for being my son. It was the greatest privilege of my life. The video ended. I sat in silence, staring at the blank screen. What are you going to do? Manuel finally asked. I thought about my father's words, about choosing deliberately, about being the person I wanted to be, not just reacting to Joanna's cruelty. Then I thought about last night, the public humiliation, the mocking hashtags, the threat to take my inheritance, to sue me for fraud, to destroy my reputation, the calculated cruelty of ruining my birthday in front of everyone I knew. I'm going to make a choice, I said slowly. Not the choice my father wanted me to make, but the choice I need to make. He gave me information. He gave me options. Now I get to decide what to do with them. I looked at Clara Moniz. Can you set up a meeting? Everyone involved. My mother, my sister, Domingos, their attorney. Tomorrow if possible. Tell them I'm prepared to discuss the inheritance situation. What are you planning? She asked carefully. I'm planning to give everyone exactly what they deserve, I said. No more, no less. Exactly what they deserve. The conference room at Clara Moniz's law office was designed for difficult family meetings. Comfortable chairs, a box of tissues prominently placed, soft lighting that was supposed to reduce tension. None of it helped the atmosphere when Joanna, Domingos, and their attorney walked in at precisely 2 p.m. the following afternoon. Joanna looked tired, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. Her hand trembled slightly as she set down her purse. So slightly I might not have noticed if I wasn't looking for it. Early symptoms, or just stress? Impossible to know. Domingos wore his smuggest expression, a man certain of victory. Their attorney, a sharp-eyed man named Luis Castro, carried a thick folder of documents. My mother arrived separately, refusing to look at anyone, and took a seat in the corner like she was trying to disappear into the wall. I sat at the head of the conference table with Clara on my right and Paulo Reis, my own attorney, on my left. In front of me was a single folder, thin compared to Luis Castro's arsenal, but infinitely more powerful. Thank you all for coming, Clara began formally. We are here to discuss Mr. Afonso Carmo's position regarding his inheritance from Francisco João Carmo, particularly in light of recent DNA revelations and Miss Joanna Carmo's stated intention to contest said inheritance. This shouldn't take long, Luis Castro interrupted. My clients have clear evidence of fraud. Mr. Afonso Carmo accepted $400 in inheritance money while knowing, or should have known, that he was not Francisco Carmo's biological son. This constitutes inheritance fraud. We're prepared to file suit if Mr. Carmo doesn't agree to voluntary repayment immediately. With interest, Domingos added, calculated from the date of distribution. That's approximately $475,000 now. Joanna said nothing, just stared at me with an expression I couldn't read. Defiance mixed with something else. Uncertainty. Fear. Before we proceed, Clara said calmly, I need to inform everyone present that Francisco Carmo left specific instructions regarding this exact scenario. Mr. Paulo Reis, as Mr. Afonso Carmo's counsel, would you like to explain? Paulo opened his own folder. Francisco Carmo anticipated the possibility of an inheritance challenge based on parentage. His will contains explicit contingency clauses. I'll read the relevant section. Should any heir contest the validity of another heir's inheritance on grounds of parentage, Said contest shall trigger the unsealing of documents held at Bay Federal Credit Union, Box 247, and the automatic redistribution of assets according to secondary provisions therein. What does that mean? Domingos demanded. It means, I said, speaking for the first time, that the moment Joanna publicly declared I wasn't entitled to my inheritance based on DNA, she triggered a legal mechanism my father put in place. Clara, would you distribute the documents? Clara passed folders to everyone at the table. I watched their faces as they opened them and began reading. These are medical records, Luis Castro said slowly. For Joanna Carmo? He looked up sharply. This is a violation of medical privacy. These can't be admitted in any. They were voluntarily placed in the safe deposit box by Francisco Carmo, who had legal access to them as Joanna's parent, Paolo interrupted. There's no privacy violation. Please continue reading. I watched Joanna's face drain of color as she read the genetic testing results. This can't be real, she whispered. This says I have. This says I'm going to. She couldn't finish the sentence. Huntington's disease, I said quietly. You're a carrier for the gene mutation. Dad knew. He had you tested as a baby because it runs in the Carmo family. His father died of it. He was a carrier too. No, Joanna said, but her voice was weak. This is fake. You're making this up to. There's a video, Clara said gently. Your father recorded testimony before he died. Would you like to see it? Joanna's hands were shaking visibly now. Domingos grabbed the medical records from her, reading rapidly, his smug expression transforming into horror. The second document in your folder, Paolo continued, shows the full estate distribution. The total estate was $1 million, not $800, $1. There is an irrevocable medical trust of $1, $3 million, specifically designated for Joanna's medical care. Once diagnosed with Huntington's disease, it will cover all treatment, all care, all expenses related to the condition. I don't understand, Domingo said, but he was starting to. I could see it in his face. My father split the non-medical portion of his estate evenly between his children, I explained. Not because he didn't know I wasn't his biological son, he knew. Not because he didn't love Joanna, he did, but because he knew she would need extensive medical care that I wouldn't, and he'd already set aside money for that specific purpose. I pulled out another document. This is the genetic counseling report from before Joanna's conception. It details the risk factors for Huntington's disease in any biological children of Francisco Carmo. He and my mother knew about this risk before Joanna was born. My mother made a small, broken sound in the corner. Everyone turned to look at her. Tell them, I said to her, not unkindly. Tell them the truth about why you and Dad separated, why you had the affair with Carlos Brandano. Tell them everything. Isabel looked up with tears streaming down her face. Francisco and I fought about having a second child. I wanted another baby. He didn't, because he was terrified of passing on Huntington's disease. We'd used IVF with Joanna specifically to screen for the gene, but it didn't work. She still got it. He blamed himself. He couldn't bear the thought of another child suffering the same fate. So you left him, Joanna whispered. We separated, Isabel corrected. I was angry and hurt, and I made a mistake. I had a relationship with Carlos for 3 months. When I got pregnant, I came back to Francisco immediately. I gave him all the information. I let him choose whether to stay or go. He chose to stay. He chose Afonso. Because Afonso wouldn't have the disease, Joanna said bitterly. Because Afonso was genetically superior. Because he loved me, I said firmly. And because he loved you, Joanna. Everything he did out of love for both of us. He set aside money to care for you. He split the rest evenly. He never told you about your condition because he didn't want you to live in fear of something that might not show up for decades. He was trying to protect you. By lying to me, she shot back. By giving you the best life he could, I countered. You had 32 years of not knowing. 32 years of living without that shadow. He gave you that gift. Domingos was reading through the financial documents with increasing distress. This medical trust, it's irrevocable? We can't access it unless Joanna is formally diagnosed, Clara confirmed. Those were Francisco's explicit instructions. But once diagnosed, all medical expenses are covered completely. She'll never have to worry about the cost of treatment. And if she's never diagnosed? Luis Castro asked. Then the trust remains intact, invested and growing, until it's eventually needed, or until Joanna's death, at which point it would distribute to any of her children who might need it, Clara explained. The room fell silent as everyone processed this. Finally, Joanna looked up at me. The symptoms in the report: personality changes, impulsivity, aggression. Is that why you think She couldn't finish. I think, I said carefully, that you're under enormous stress. Pregnancy, a new house, financial pressure, and maybe, there's something else happening that you should get checked out. Not because I want to be right, but because if there is something, early intervention can help manage it. This doesn't change anything, Domingo said suddenly, his voice sharp. You still accepted money as Francisco's son when you weren't his biological child. That's still fraud. Actually, Paulo said with satisfaction, it's not. Francisco Carmo legally adopted Afonso Miguel Carmo when Afonso was 3 days old. The adoption papers are in your folder, page 12. Francisco is legally Afonso's father in every sense that matters to inheritance law. The biological parentage is completely irrelevant. I'd forgotten about the adoption, or maybe I'd never known, but there it was in legal black and white. Francisco Juan Carmo had formally adopted me as an infant, making me legally his son regardless of DNA. So you have no case, Paulo continued. No fraud, no grounds for contest. In fact, by publicly challenging Afonso's inheritance, Miss Carmo has violated the contingency clause in the will. According to the secondary provisions, any heir who contests another heir's inheritance on grounds later proven to be legally invalid must forfeit a portion of their own inheritance to the wronged party. How much? Luis Castro asked, though he clearly didn't want to hear the answer. 25% of Joanna's inheritance, Paulo said. That's $100, which will be transferred to Afonso as penalty for the contest. That's insane, Domingos exploded. We're about to have a baby. We have a mortgage. We can't afford to lose $100. You should have thought of that, I said coldly, before you helped humiliate me in front of 40 people and posted it on social media, before you threatened to sue me for fraud, before you called me a thief and a liar. This is revenge, Joanna whispered. You're using Dad's money to punish me. No, I said. I'm using Dad's legal framework to protect what he wanted me to have. The framework he put in place because he knew exactly what you would do. He loved you, Joanna, but he wasn't blind to your flaws. He knew if you ever found out I wasn't his biological son, you'd use it against me. So he made sure I'd be protected when you did. I stood up, gathering my folder. The $100, 0 penalty is being transferred to my account as we speak. Consider it compensation for the emotional distress, reputational damage, and public humiliation you caused. The videos are still up on Instagram, by the way. Thousands of views. My colleagues have seen it. My boss has seen it. You made sure everyone knew my most private family business. Afonso, please, my mother said. Don't do this. She's your sister. She's sick. She might be sick, I corrected. We don't know for sure. But sick or not, she made a choice. She chose to hurt me in the worst way possible. She chose to mock me, threaten me, try to steal from me. Those were her choices. Now she gets to live with the consequences. Joanna was crying now, her hands over her face. I'm sorry, she sobbed. I'm so sorry, I didn't mean. I was scared about money and the baby, and I thought you could take what was mine because you decided I didn't deserve it. I finished. You thought my pain didn't matter because you were hurting too. Well, now we're both hurting. Congratulations. I walked toward the door, then paused. The medical trust is real, Joanna. When you're ready, if you need it, it will be there. Dad made sure of that. Whatever else happened, he did love you. He wanted you taken care of. That part isn't revenge. That part is his gift to you. What about Carlos Brandão? She asked suddenly. Are you going to find him? Tell him about you? I thought about the address in Lisbon, the ethics professor who didn't know I existed. I don't know, I admitted. That's my choice to make. Not yours. Not Mom's. Mine. Just like using that DNA test against me was your choice. I left them sitting in that conference room. My sister crying, her husband calculating financial damage, my mother looking broken, their attorney trying to figure out how his sure win case had imploded so completely. Manuel was waiting in the parking garage. How did it go? Exactly how it needed to, I said. But as I drove away, I couldn't help thinking about Joanna's trembling hands, the fear in her eyes when she'd read about Huntington's disease. I thought about my father's words about remembering the good sister when the bad one was all I could see. The revenge was complete. The money was protected. Justice had been served. So why did it feel so hollow? 3 weeks later, Joanna showed up at my apartment at 11 p.m. I almost didn't answer the door, but something in the persistence of her knocking made me look through the peephole. She was alone, without Domingos, and she looked terrible, thinner, older, exhausted. "Please," she said when I opened the door. "I need to talk to you. Just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I let her in. She stood awkwardly in my living room, looking at everything except me. "I got tested," she said finally, "after the meeting. Full neurological workup, genetic confirmation, everything. The preliminary results." She took a shuddering breath. "They think I'm in early-stage Huntington's. The symptoms have been there for almost a year, but I thought it was just stress from the pregnancy planning and the house purchase. The impulsivity, the mood swings, the paranoia about money. I thought I was just being practical. But it was the disease." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Regardless of everything else, this was devastating news. The neurologist said that people with early Huntington's often exhibit increased aggression and decreased empathy, she continued. They lose the ability to properly assess social consequences. They become impulsive and cruel without understanding why. She finally looked at me. "I'm not making excuses. What I did was unforgivable. But I need you to know that I wasn't entirely myself, and I'm getting worse." "How fast?" "They can't say for sure. Maybe 5 years before serious motor symptoms, maybe 10. But the personality changes are already progressing. They want to start me on medication immediately." She wiped her eyes. "Domingos left me. When the full diagnosis came in, he filed for divorce. Said he didn't sign up to be a caretaker for a degenerative disease. Said the baby was probably affected too, though we won't know for years. He wants me to consider termination." The cruelty of that took my breath away. "I'm sorry," I said again, because what else was there to say? "Mom told me everything," Joanna continued. "The full story about you and Carlos Brandon, about Dad's adoption of you, about how he planned everything to protect both of us. I never knew he loved me that much. I thought he always preferred you because you were smarter, more accomplished, more everything. But he was just trying to give me a normal life before the disease took it away." She pulled an envelope from her purse. "This is a check for $100, $0, the penalty money. I'm giving it back. You don't have to accept it, but I want you to know that I understand I was wrong. About everything." I looked at the check but didn't take it. "Keep it. You're going to need every dollar for medical expenses the trust doesn't cover. For the baby, if you decide to continue the pregnancy. For whatever comes next." "Afonso, I don't forgive you," I interrupted. "I can't, not yet. Maybe not ever. What you did at that restaurant, the public humiliation, the way you tried to steal from me, that was real, disease or not. But I don't need to punish you anymore either. Life is doing that just fine on its own." She flinched, but nodded. "Fair enough. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What I did, what I destroyed. We used to be close when we were kids. You were my little brother and I loved you. Somewhere along the way, I lost that. I became someone who could hurt you without caring. Maybe that was always in me, or maybe it was the disease. Either way, I'm sorry." After she left, I sat in the dark for a long time. The revenge had worked perfectly. I'd exposed her cruelty, protected my inheritance, and made her face consequences for her actions. I'd won every battle. But my sister was dying. Slowly, inevitably, the disease would take her mind, her body, herself. The cruel woman who'd humiliated me was already being erased by neurological decay, replaced by someone who would eventually need complete care. My father had known this was coming. That was why he'd planned so carefully, why he'd tried to protect me while ensuring Joanna would be cared for. He'd understood that she would hurt me, but he'd also known she couldn't help what she was becoming. I picked up my phone and pulled up the information about Carlos Brandon, the ethics professor in Lisbon. My biological father. I'd been avoiding this decision for weeks, paralyzed by the weight of it. But suddenly it seemed clear. I'd spent weeks defending Francisco's role as my father, proving that he'd legally adopted me, that biology didn't matter compared to love and choice. How could I then seek out Carlos? As if Francisco hadn't been enough. I deleted the file. Whatever curiosity I had about my biological origins wasn't worth diminishing what Francisco had given me. He'd been my father in every way that mattered. That was enough. Instead, I opened my email and typed a message to Clara Moniz. Please set up a meeting with my mother. Just the two of us. I think it's time we really talked. If Joanna's disease was progressive, if Domingos had abandoned her, she was going to need support. Not from me. I wasn't ready for that. But from Isabel, our mother, who'd made mistakes but who'd also tried to do right by both her children in impossible circumstances. And maybe, eventually, I could help too. Not as a brother who'd forgiven everything, but as someone who understood that cruelty and illness sometimes wore the same face, and that punishment had its limits. The money was protected. The truth was revealed. Justice had been served. But real life, I was learning, didn't end when the revenge was complete. It just kept going, messy and complicated and full of choices that had no clear right answer. My father had known that. That was why he'd left me information instead of instructions. Why he'd given me options instead of orders. He'd trusted me to figure out what to do with the truth once I had it. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd won the war. Now I had to figure out how to live with that victory. 6 months after the conference room confrontation, I sat in a different kind of room. A support group for families affected by Huntington's disease. I hadn't planned to be there. But when my mother had called asking if I'd accompany her to learn more about what Joanna was facing, I'd found myself unable to say no. Joanna wasn't there. She'd moved back in with our mother after Domingos' desertion, and she spent most of her days now at medical appointments or resting through the exhaustion that came with the early-stage symptoms and the medications meant to slow their progression. She'd lost the baby at 14 weeks. A miscarriage the doctors said might have been stress-related, but could also have been the disease affecting her body's systems. The other people in the support group shared stories that were heartbreaking in their similarity. Personality changes that destroyed relationships, impulsive behavior that ruined careers, the slow theft of the self that happened long before the motor symptoms made the disease visible to outsiders. The hardest part, one man said, is knowing that when my wife says cruel things, I can't tell if it's the disease or if it's really her. Does it matter? Should I forgive it either way? I don't know. I understood that uncertainty viscerally now. The Joanna who'd humiliated me at my birthday party, was that my sister's true nature revealed, or was it the disease already eating away at her impulse control and empathy? Did it matter which one it was? After the meeting, my mother and I went for coffee at a quiet cafe near her house. We'd been talking more over these months, filling in gaps in each other's understanding of our family history. She'd told me about falling in love with Carlos Brandano, about the guilt that had haunted her for nearly 30 years, about watching Francisco choose to be my father every single day, despite the pain my existence must have caused him. He never once treated you differently, she said now, stirring sugar into her coffee with mechanical precision. Not once. Even when Joanna would act out for attention, even when she'd point out that you didn't look like him, he never wavered. You were his son. That was the end of the discussion in his mind. I know, I said quietly. I've been reading his journals. Clara gave them to me last month. He wrote about his decision to adopt me, about his fears for Joanna's future, about hoping we'd both be okay after he was gone. I paused. He wrote about that night at the restaurant, too. He predicted it, almost word for word. He knew Joanna would find out somehow, that she'd use it as a weapon, that it would all explode publicly, and yet he didn't warn you, Isabel said with a touch of bitterness. Because he wanted me to make my own choices, I replied. Not react based on his warnings, but decide for myself who I wanted to be when tested. He gave me all the tools I needed, the safe deposit box, the legal protections, the truth about Joanna's condition, but he let me decide what to do with them. My mother looked at me carefully. And have you decided? I thought about the $100 sitting in my investment account, money I'd taken as penalty for Joanna's cruelty. I thought about the satisfaction I'd felt watching her face crumble in that conference room, the justice of seeing her understand that she'd miscalculated badly. I gave the money back, I said. Last week. Set up a transfer to an account in her name. She doesn't know yet. I did it through Clara, anonymously. Why? Isabel asked. After everything she did. Because my father was right, I interrupted. Revenge felt good for about 10 minutes. Then it just felt empty. The money doesn't change what happened. It doesn't erase the humiliation or the pain. It just makes me someone who profited from his sister's illness, which isn't who I want to be. That's very mature of you, my mother said softly. It's not maturity, I corrected. It's self-preservation. I spent 6 months carrying around anger like a weight, justifying it as righteous justice. But watching Joanna deteriorate, seeing how scared she is, knowing what's coming for her, I don't want to add to that, not because she deserves mercy, but because I deserve peace. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Isabel said, "She wants to see you. She's been asking for weeks. She's too afraid to call you herself." "I know," I said. "She's texted me a few times. I haven't responded." "Are you going to?" I finished my coffee, considering. Maybe. Eventually. When I'm ready. Not to forgive her. I don't know if I can do that. But maybe to just exist in the same room without anger. To let her be my sister again in whatever limited way is possible now. "What about Carlos Brandão?" Isabel asked suddenly. "Have you thought more about contacting him?" "I deleted his information, might I said. I had a father, a good one. I don't need to go looking for a replacement just because biology says he's out there somewhere." My mother's eyes filled with tears. "Francisco would be so proud of you." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe he'd tell me I was being too soft, that I should have taken Joanna for everything I could get." I smiled slightly. That's the thing about Dad. He gave me choices but not answers. I have to figure out the answers myself. A week later, I visited Joanna at my mother's house. She was sitting in the garden, reading a book with obvious difficulty. The fine motor control necessary to hold pages was starting to become challenging. She looked up when I came out, and her face went through a series of expressions before settling on wary hope. "Hi," she said simply. "Hi," I replied, sitting in the chair across from her. "Mom said you wanted to talk." "I did. I do, She set down the book with a frustrated gesture. "I don't know what to say." "Sorry doesn't cover it." "Nothing covers it." "No," I agreed. "Nothing does." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a minute. Then Joanna said, "I heard about the money. Clara told me someone anonymously transferred $100,000 into my medical expense account. That was you, wasn't it?" "Does it matter who it was?" "Yes," she said firmly. "Because if it was you, it means you're a better person than I deserve to have as a brother." "It doesn't mean that," I said. "It just means I'm tired of being angry." "Anger is exhausting, Joanna, and you're sick. Maybe you were sick when you did what you did. Maybe you weren't. I'll never know for sure. But you're definitely sick now, and getting sicker, and I don't want to spend whatever time you have left hating you." "Whatever time I have left," she repeated softly. "That's the reality now, isn't it? Every day that passes is a day closer to not being myself anymore. That's the reality for everyone," I pointed out. "You just know it more explicitly than most people do." She laughed, a broken sound. "That's very philosophical of you. Very Carlos Brandão." "I wouldn't know," I said. "I've never met him. Don't plan to." "Really? Even after everything?" "Francisco was my father," I said simply. "DNA doesn't change that. What you did at the restaurant doesn't change that. Nothing changes that." Joanna nodded slowly. "For what it's worth, I understand that now, and I'm sorry I ever tried to take it away from you. I was wrong. About everything." We talked for another hour, carefully navigating around the worst of the pain, finding neutral topics, her doctor's appointments, my work on a new research project, our mother's attempts to redecorate the house. It wasn't reconciliation, not really. The damage was too deep for that. But it was something. A starting point. A possibility that maybe eventually we could be siblings again in some limited way. As I left, Joanna called out, "Afonso, thank you for coming, for the money, for not hating me even though you have every right to. I'm working on not hating you." I said honestly. Some days are easier than others. That's fair, she said. That's more than fair. Driving home through San Francisco's evening traffic, I thought about my father's video testimony, his trust in me to make the right choices. I'd gotten my revenge. I'd won the battle. But in the end, I'd given the money back and shown up at my sister's door anyway. Maybe that was weakness. Maybe that was strength. Maybe it was just what happened when you stopped letting anger make your decisions for you. My phone buzzed with a text from Manuel. Dinner tomorrow? Want to hear how things went with Joanna? I smiled and texted back. Sure. Long story, but the short version is, sometimes winning means knowing when to stop fighting. The longer version was more complicated, more nuanced, full of uncertainty about whether I'd made the right choices. But I'd made them deliberately as myself, not as a reaction to Joanna's cruelty or my father's expectations or anyone else's judgment. In the end, maybe that was what my father had really left me in that safe deposit box. Not just evidence and money and legal protections, but the freedom to choose what kind of person I wanted to be when faced with betrayal and pain. I'd chosen to be someone who could walk away from revenge, someone who could acknowledge anger without being consumed by it, someone who could look at his dying sister and feel pity instead of satisfaction. It wasn't the ending Joanna deserved after what she'd done, but it was the ending I needed to be able to live with myself. And in the end, that was what mattered most.